The headlines shook the world. Interpol. A warrant is issued for Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré. It was the end of a revolution for many. A young president pursued by the world's most effective policing network. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of demolishing him, the warrant boomeranged. Crowds poured into the streets. From Mali to Niger, from Senegal to South Africa, youth hoisted his name like a banner of defiance. Why should an arrest warrant make a soldier a symbol? And what does it show us about the battle for Africa's future? Stick with me, because this story is about more than Burkina Faso. This is a story of power, resistance, and how one man came to the face of a continent's struggle for freedom. The same startling headlines appeared around the world the morning the news broke. Interpol issues an arrest warrant for Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré. It appeared to many people worldwide, who hardly knew his name, that he was just another African coup leader who was in violation of international law. However, it was personal for millions of people in Africa. Ibrahim Traoré was more than just a president to them. Being the one who spoke out against foreign exploitation, the leader who told the West that Africa will no longer kneel, and the man who had the audacity to question the status quo, he was a symbol of defiance. Therefore, people were not silenced when Interpol's red notice appeared on news screens. It set them on fire. The streets of Ouagadougou were crowded. Young people waved the flags of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. "You cannot arrest our dignity," yelled the protesters. "Africa cannot be arrested." The irony was startling. Traoré had just become a hero thanks to Interpol, the most potent police network in the world, which was created to track criminals across international borders. However, before we can comprehend how this went so wrong, we must first ask, who is Ibrahim Traoré? And why would Interpol want him silenced under pressure from superpowers around the world? Understanding the man at the heart of this story is essential to appreciating its significance. Ibrahim Traoré was born in 1988 and grew up in Burkina Faso, which is still dealing with the effects of colonial rule. Poverty and Tales of Thomas Sankara, the renowned African revolutionary who once envisioned a free and independent Burkina Faso, characterized his early years. Traoré enlisted in the military as a young man because, in his words, the defense of the people begins with sacrifice, not because of privilege or wealth. Burkina Faso was drowning in crisis by 2022. Rural villages were devastated by terrorist attacks. The economy was in ruins. Additionally, the populace no longer trusted their government. Traoré, who was only 34 at the time, led a military rebellion. Many outside referred to it as a coup. However, it was a rescue to many Burkinabé. They saw a leader who stood with them, who understood their language, and who dared to take on the most powerful countries in the world for the first time in decades. He drove out French troops within weeks of seizing power. He said that foreign companies would no longer be given cheap access to Burkina Faso's resources, which include cotton, uranium, and gold. In order to create what he called a confederation of free African states, he called for unification with Mali and Niger. Young Africans all over the continent admired him for these audacious actions. However, they also painted a target on the back. He was viewed as a threat by Western powers rather than a reformer. The pressure soon increased. Sanctions, dangers, smear campaigns, until, at last, the warrant. On paper, fugitives, warlords, and drug traffickers are the targets of an Interpol red notice. But in Ibrahim Traoré's case, politics, not crime, was what led to the warrant. The charges were ambiguous on paper. Allegations of human rights violations, regional instability, and threats to international order. However, the timing made the truth clear. Just a few months prior, Traoré had declared a historic agreement to form a military and economic partnership with neighboring Mali and Niger in an effort to break free from French influence. Together, the three countries said they would no longer be subject to Western demands or ECOWAS sanctions. Rather, using their own resources, They would create a new future. Then came the most audacious step. Traoré's administration renegotiated mining agreements, insisting that Burkina Faso retain the majority of its own uranium and gold earnings. This was unacceptable to multinational corporations. The stakes were billions of dollars. Capitals in the West became uneasy. Serious consequences were the warning from their diplomats. Traoré was portrayed as a dictator by their media. Interpol came into play shortly after. The catch is that Interpol is not a standalone entity. The most powerful member states have a significant influence on this network. The system can be used as a weapon by those countries when they want to target someone. The red notice then showed up. However, what was intended to isolate Traoré actually had the opposite effect. Ibrahim Traoré became a legend as a result of the arrest warrant rather than becoming weaker. People protested in the streets all over Burkina Faso. Youth held signs that said, "Interpol cannot arrest our dignity," while women banged pot. Some even proclaimed Traoré the new face of African resistance by painting his face next to Thomas Sankara. The effect quickly spread. Young people marched in solidarity in Mali. Leaders in Niger said they would not accept the warrant. Activists used Traoré's name as a rallying cry against neocolonialism even in Senegal and Ghana, which are not part of his alliance. On social media, hashtags like "Oh Hands Off Traoré" and "Africa for Africans" began trending. The warrant was interpreted by millions of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora as evidence that international powers will attempt to overthrow any African leader who dared to speak out. The great irony is that Traoré had just been given the moral high ground by Interpol, which is meant to bring criminals to justice. He was now viewed as a freedom fighter rather than a wanted man. Even leaders outside Africa took notice. He was hailed by Russian commentators as a representation of opposition to Western hegemony. Activists in Latin America likened him to Che Guevara. Once limited to Burkina Faso, Traoré's image was now widely recognized. For the people of Burkina Faso, the message was simple. If the world wants to arrest our leader, then our leader must be doing something right. One important lesson from history is that sometimes a leader is strengthened by things intended to undermine him. Ibrahim Traoré saw the Interpol warrant as more than just a formal document. It turned into a symbol, a red piece of paper that exposed the true character of world power and the extent to which it will go to maintain Africa's enslavement. The warrant demonstrated to his supporters that he was carrying on the legacy of African leaders Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara, who defied the global order and suffered the consequences. However, things are different this time. Africa has spoken up. Over 60% of the continent's population consists of young people who are organized, connected, and fearless. They see Traoré as a reflection of themselves, young, resolute, and uncontrollable, rather than just a president. The warrant also brought a more significant issue to the attention of the world. Who has the authority to determine the future of African leaders? Is it better to dictate it from Brussels, Washington, or Paris? Or ought it to be decided in Niamey, Bamako, and Ouagadougou? This is the reason the move didn't work out, because it revealed the hypocrisy of the very system that issued it, rather than undermining Traoré. The same global networks that frequently ignore autocrats who support foreign interests felt compelled to target a leader who dared to mention sovereignty. The future is still unclear for Burkina Faso. The problems are real: political instability, economic hardship, and terrorism. But the spirit unleashed by the warrant has united people in a way that no speech or policy could have. Across Africa, a new generation is beginning to whisper a dangerous but powerful thought. If they fear him, maybe we should follow him. And that, more than any red notice, more than any foreign pressure, is what makes the story of Ibrahim Traoré impossible to erase. The Interpol warrant against Ibrahim Traoré might ultimately be remembered as one of the most significant strategic errors ever committed against an African leader. It gave him a voice rather than silence. It gave him allies rather than alienated him. It strengthened his movement rather than broke it. Furthermore, it's possible that in years to come, people won't recall the accusations, court cases, or the specifics of the warrant. They will never forget seeing young Africans chanting his name while marching through the streets. They will remember the moment a piece of paper meant to shame a leader became a badge of honor. And they will remember that in 2025, Africa's struggle for dignity could not be arrested. What are your thoughts? Was this an act of fear or justice? Was the warrant related to control or crimes? I'll be reading your comments, so please share your thoughts. Subscribe to the Ibrahim Traoré Files if you think that stories like this should be told. Because we don't just read the headlines here, we uncover the truth behind them. Until the next time, remember that sometimes what is supposed to break you can actually make you stronger and more resilient.